Andrew's perspective. "Remind me again why you couldn't just do this yourself," I whispered, my knees beginning to feel sore as I slinked up the hillside in a crouched position so as to conceal myself amongst the field of massive chest-height flowers planted along the lower slope. "The only reason I'm able to hack most of the technology on Aleph is that my company plays a role in its maintenance, allowing me to insert backdoor access," Bath began, the ringing that had previously accompanied his intermissions now all but gone. "This installation is under strict supervision by the stewards. They use it to send signals to primitive civilizations, informing them of their new overlords." "So?" Momentarily, a light bluster of static echoed in my mind like the RI equivalent of a sigh as Bouth answered me. "Government networks like these are closed off from the rest of the net and quantum encrypted to boot. If I tried to get in and crack the damn thing digitally, I'd be at it until the heat death of the universe. Manual access is, to put it lightly, a marginally quicker solution." Coming to a stop as my path once again ran up against to that of the road winding around this place in a spiral pattern, I watched carefully as a large, wheeled military vehicle came trundling along down the hill. "What were they doing up there?" I hissed into the microphone of my cloak, irrationally fearful that the truck's occupants might somehow hear me. "Honestly, I haven't a clue," confessed the RI, his all-knowing facade slipping away ever so slightly as the vehicle disappeared around the hill's edge. "Nevertheless, I would recommend getting a move on. I fear Zemera might be onto us." Momentarily resuming my upright posture, I dashed across the hillside road like some kind of greasy cryptid before diving into the next patch of flowers. "You wouldn't happen to actually know where this station's emergency broadcasting room is, would you?" I asked, holding out hope for an affirmative answer. "You'll probably find it at the top floor. Other than that, I'm entering this as blind as you are." At last, cresting the hilltop's final slope, I breathed in out a sigh of relief as I found myself no longer trekking uphill. Brushing past a battalion of ornamental bushes, I stepped out carefully into the facility parking lot. Far above me, the lights of this communications center glittered in the darkness like stars. There were few streetlights up here, and all but one that I could see had been turned off, blanketing the area in near-total darkness. Placing one hand firmly upon the shock baton supplied to me by Bayoth, I crept forth as carefully as I could in search of an entry point to the tower. Windows were an obvious no-go. Whatever sort of glass the Irrigan were using here would surely not break easily, and even if I did somehow manage, it would attract far too much attention for my liking. Walking in through the front door was obviously not an option, and the back appeared to be locked via biometric scanners. For every second that I wasted skulking about the building's perimeter, my thoughts grew increasingly uneasy. I kept wondering if my next step would be the one interrupted by sudden unconsciousness as Zemera found and tranquilized me. Turning the corner to complete my second lap of the building, icy fear gripped my veins as I saw the front door sliding open with a gentle whir. Immediately throwing my back against the adjacent wall so as to hide myself from sight, I stared over my shoulder like a deer in headlights at the long shadow strutting out to join me in the darkness. Upon finally catching a glimpse of the shadow's owner, my initial reaction was relief upon seeing them not to be an Irrigan, followed by surprise at just how diminutive they were. No more than 3 feet tall from what I could eyeball. "This is your chance," Baoth proclaimed as I followed this alien's footsteps with my eyes, watching him veer toward a small vehicle across the parking lot from me. "He's light enough for you to carry over to the back door. There, you can use his biometric signature to gain access." Shock baton at the ready, I slinked out from behind the corner and began moving into position. Unfortunately, my astronaut training didn't include Stealth 101E, as at a mere meter or two away, the small alien heard my approach and spun around to face me. Who are you?" they stammered, their features quivering in clear terror upon my comparatively imposing posture coupled with a dangerous weapon. For a moment, I hesitated to strike them, but the sound of emphatic affirmations from Baoth quickly overpowered my reluctance. Lunging forth before the alien could regain themselves and plunging my baton into their neck, I breathed a sigh of relief as they crumpled to the floor almost immediately. Wasting not a moment to contemplate what I had just done, I quickly slung the creature over my shoulder and began headed toward the back door. For fucking once, it seemed that the universe had tossed me a scrap of good luck that I might find an alien so easy to carry. Arriving at the back door and placing their palm upon the biometric scanner, I breathed a sigh of relief as the door slid open without resistance, clearing the way for me to enter. "A word of warning," the RI began, freezing in my tracks as I agonized preemptively over the bullshit complication about to be thrown in to this already perilous task. "Once you're inside the building, I won't be able to communicate with you until you're back out. Know now that Zemera is on her way, and be quick about this, all right? You've got it." Expeditiously making my way through the hallways that all looked similar, I was shocked by just how few people there were here. Most of the staff were too busy typing away on computers to even notice me. Security cameras weren't too much of a problem, either thanks to the recalcitrant cloak given to me by their leader. Apparently, though the communications hub was impossible to hack due to its closed network, they nevertheless used AI recognition technology from Bouth's company. These neural networks contained the purposeful defect of not being able to flag footage containing a certain pattern of dots, almost like a QR code, the very same pattern plastered upon every inch of my cloak. Because of this, no automatic alarms would be triggered by my unauthorized presence. Arriving at the metallic stairwell door and easing it open as daintily as possible before slipping inside, I began my long run up the stairs. Flight after flight flew past beneath my feet as I sprinted up the first few floors. Such speed, however, could not be maintained indefinitely, and soon enough I was totally winded. I'll have to pace myself a bit here, I thought, ceasing my upward trajectory for a moment as I pressed the left side of my face against the cold metal wall, savoring the chilled surface as my body slid to the ground practically of its own volition. This reprieve, however, was even more momentary than it was pleasant. Shock stiffened my features as just beside the wall I was pressed against, another of the stairwell's doors gently eased open as through it stepped a massive Irigan male who more resembled an idealized bronze statue than a person. "Hey there, buddy," he smiled, kneeling down beside me as I contemplated my next move. Despite his immaculate physiology, I could guess by the cataracts in his eyes that this Irigan was old. "Are you lost? Does your mommy work here?" If I'm to be honest, I had by this point just about fucking had it with these aliens and their patronizing nonsense. Thinking back on it, this one was probably the result of a simple misunderstanding, with the elderly Irigan in question likely having mistaken me for a small child. At the moment, however, my only thought was how good it felt to actually tase one of them. His breath audibly hitched in his throat as my weapon made contact, sending him crumpling to the ground where for a moment he seized before at last falling still. "I'm going to need to have a serious talk with these people about boundaries," I quipped to myself, wasting not another moment on the unconscious Irigan as I continued my sprint up the stairs. Arriving at the top floor with a momentary hoot of pride at having conquered that Herculean task, I shoved open the metal door and staggered out into the hall in search of my objective. The emergency broadcasting room was much easier to find than I had expected, residing just down a hall parallel to the elevator. Gleefully flinging open the doors with an almost maniacal cackle, I walked inside as the lights sensed my movement and flickered on. Just across the room from me, a mere 10 meters or so away, was what upon first glance almost looked like an arcade machine built into the wall. With a small screen and physical buttons, I couldn't wait to get my fingers on both for the completion of my task and for the simple joy of pushing actual buttons. Conjuring up one final burst of speed, I flung myself against the console and immediately set to work on trying to figure it out. The simplistic design of this computer made sense given its singular, oh-so-important purpose of sending emergency messages. From my understanding, most FTL messages were sent from larger stations near where ships docked. These smaller terminals, Bouth told me, were an emergency precaution in order to call in reinforcements even if the main stations were down. Once an emergency message was recorded, it would be transmitted to a specialized antenna at the top of the station. There, a reserve of antimatter would be used to generate a microscopic wormhole for a handful of nanoseconds, just long enough for a message carried on ultraviolet waves to go through. From there, I just had to hope that humanity could pick up on such a signal. It was a long shot, but it was also the best one we had. Carefully wrapping my fingers around the computer's joystick, I took a moment to ponder over the textual menu in search of the option to transmit an emergency message. Finding this option just a few rows down, I pressed the red Enter button and selected the option to record. Beginning recording in 3, 2, 1. Taking a deep breath as the count reached 0, I cleared my throat anxiously as a little icon appeared on screen indicating that it was, in fact, recording. "People of humanity," I began, my voice hoarse and weak as I contemplated what to even say. "My name is Andrew Malix. I was the sole passenger aboard the UNS Destiny when its thrusters failed and sent me adrift in space. My story after that is long, and I don't have time to explain it right now, but I am not dead. I am currently in the custody of an alien empire called the Iragon, and they have plans to invade. If you have orbital defenses, get them ready. If you have fleets, rally them. We are vastly outnumbered and comically outgunned, but with the combined might of humanity, we can win this." My heart pounded in my chest as machine ceased its recording. Now all that remained was to attach the Iragon ship schematics stored on the flash drive Bouth gave me and— "Step away from the console, Andrew." Zimera's voice sliced through the silence like a knife, its gentle lilt stabbing into me and twisting for good measure as I turned around to see her stood at the mouth of the doorway, her tranquilizer gun aimed square at my chest. No. Foiled mere seconds away from completing the mission, my features quivered with rage directed primarily toward the steward, but also to a lesser extent myself for being too slow. There was no way I could plug the drive in without her noticing, and even sending the message as it were would require a handful of button presses. "I was worried sick about you," she cooed, her grip on the gun never for a moment faltering. "Please, just step away from the computer and we can talk about this." Taking into account my drastically limited options, I exhaled shakily in defeat as my fingers slid off the buttons and following orders I stepped aside, nevertheless regarding her with a furious glare. "I can't allow you to take over Earth nor Arkeesa," I growled, desperately fighting back the angry tears which stung my eyes as I spoke. "What your empire is doing here is wrong, destroying self-determination and neutering entire cultures to suit your imperialist desires. This is childish. How many times must I explain it for you to understand that we only want to help?" "Civilization doesn't need your help," I shouted, my voice cracking beneath the sheer weight of emotion pouring down upon me. Fury, pain, and desperation all merged together into one. Closing her eyes and shaking her head in disappointment, Zimera regarded me with an expression more sad than angry. "What will it take for you to understand that we're doing this all for your own good?" she asked me half rhetorically. "You can't!" I roared defiantly, wanting nothing more in the whole galaxy than to knock that pitying look off of her face and reveal the evil nestled beneath it. "Other species aren't children in need of your protection. They deserve the chance to determine for themselves what they'll become." "Easy for you to say," hissed Zimera, her eyes moistening with tears not entirely unlike my own, as the gun she held seemed to quiver in anticipation. "You've never had to comfort a young child whose parents were tortured to death publicly in service to some god that doesn't exist. You haven't been forced to put someone out of their misery after a death camp constructed by their own species left them beyond saving. You haven't been made to watch as a civilization of billions went up in nuclear fire." She was right about that, at least. I could hardly even imagine bearing witness to such awful behavior. That being said, I also understood that for a civilization to be free, it had to be allowed to commit both good and evil deeds. If that's the cost of freedom, then so fucking be it. "Why do you care more about cultures than actual people?" Zimera asked, her question loaded with more baggage than a passenger aircraft. "Culture is an abstract concept. It can't suffer, nor does it have a life to lose. Culture doesn't scream, cry, or beg when you kill it. You know what does? People. That's who our empire is meant to protect." Silence fell between us upon those words. It was like standing in the eye of a hurricane. Zimera truly believed everything she said, and there was nothing I could do to persuade her otherwise. When next the Prime Steward spoke, the gentle cadence of her voice had returned, displacing the sorrow and rage from before. Clearly, I can't convince you by appealing to your empathy. Instead, allow me to ask you a question. Let's say you do somehow manage to defeat us. Let's say Bouth takes control like he wants to and we become isolationists. Who then will rule the galaxy? Nobody, I exclaimed, taking this opportunity to espouse some ideals of my own. The galaxy doesn't have to belong to any one civilization. All of them deserve their chance to claim a piece of it for themselves. Hearing this, Zemera emitted an ironic giggle, as if I'd just told an exceptionally funny joke. It's honestly adorable you think that's how any of this works. You don't know what the civilization hypothesis is, do you? I read up on it. That theory doesn't just work for planetary civilizations, she alleged, lending to the hypothesis itself far more credence than I personally did. Just as the nature of predators is to predate and the nature of viruses is to infect, so too is the nature of competitive species to compete. Cocking my head in confusion, I motioned with my hand for her to continue. I had to know what she was trying to say before I could properly form a refutation. Let's assume that you succeed in this profoundly stupid plan. Let's also say that humanity is entirely unified beneath all the ideals you espouse. Perhaps they form a coalition of sorts with other like-minded species. Let's say this peace persists for 100 years. I am failing to see the downsides. I shrugged awkwardly. Then how about you let me fucking finish? Zemera snapped, for once allowing her patience to slip away before immediately looking remorseful. Sorry, she sighed, taking a deep breath before continuing. As far as our gravitational calculations suggest, there could be as many as 3 unaccounted-for solar harnessing spheres in our galaxy. While we, Irigan, could quite comfortably fight off a malevolent civilization wielding all 3, even a single-sphered civilization could spell disaster for a civilization like your own, which, as far as we both are aware, lacks any such technology. Now I was beginning to see what she was getting at. Even still, how much worse than you could a civilization be? You're right. How much worse could they possibly be than a stable utopia wherein nobody starves and everyone's happy? Remarked the steward sarcastically, before promptly meeting my glare with an expression of seemingly genuine disappointment. You're smarter than this, Andrew. We both know that things could be a whole lot worse than what our civilization has built. We may not be good in your eyes yet, but surely you understand that we're the lesser evil. I will confess, she did make a compelling point. Regardless, it wasn't like I could resist anymore. And what would you have me do? I asked, at this point rather used to my strings being pulled. Let me show you something, Zemera whispered gently, again talking to me as though I were a misbehaving child. Come here and take my hand. If you don't like what you see, I'll bring you right back here and you can send the message. Again, it wasn't like I had a choice. Or did I? Momentarily, my gaze broke off from her own and drifted toward the shock baton hidden beneath my cloak. If I could get close enough to use it, the message could still be sent. Reluctantly putting one foot in front of the other, I approached the Prime Steward and placed my non-dominant hand within hers, with my main hand beneath my cloak, preparing the baton. To my surprise, Zemera immediately pulled me into an embrace. Thank you, she whispered, momentarily causing me to second-guess myself as before I could regain balance, she placed her dart gun against my neck. And I'm sorry. The world fell away into nothingness.